Hello, I'm Patricia Gras. Welcome to Passion Time. I'm here with Dr. Diane Nelson. She's a professor at Duke University, a cultural anthropologist, and author of many books on Guatemala. She went there in 1985 and has been involved in that country ever since. She speaks Spanish, but we're going to do this in English. Let's talk about your book. And what I found fascinating about your book is, it's called Who Counts? The Mathematics of Death and Life After Genocide, is the fact that you use math, but also the fact that the Mayans were creators of math as well. So I want you to elaborate on that and why you use that to write your book.
A number of reasons. One of the main ones, though, was because I've been working with, both on the way the state has treated Mayan demands since the time of the war and also after the war, as sort of people were organizing around different sorts of projects. The Mayan revitalization movement of the late 1980s and 90s was what some of my early work was about, and how some of those people were, we need land, we need, the possibility of just feeding ourselves, we need a space to identify as indigenous, with our languages, with our clothing, with these things that make us proud. And then slowly people were talking about pre-Columbian indigenous knowledges as part of that revitalization project.
Wow. Okay.
And I think a lot of people know that only two human groups in the entire history of humanity have understood the concept of zero on their own.
Right.
And it were the Babylonians and the Maya, right? And all the way that the zero, for example, is used in Europe came through Arabic numbers and sort of through Venice and things with double entry bookkeeping. And so what was so interesting was people starting to say, we need to tell people this, right? Young people who are victims of racism, young people who have seen, their families and their villages destroyed, who are told they're not good for anything but being mano de obra, right? Like being just like underpaid laborers. If they know that their people who look just like them, who speak languages like their languages, understood zero, unlike anyone else. You couldn't figure out why sometimes it's in the east, sometimes in the west. And so that Mayan kids know this, right? And that, again, it's so interesting to see these skeins or these ways in which people weave together solidarity. Just up the road in Austin, some of the people who were beginning to decipher the Mayan glyphs, like Linda Sheely and David Stewart, were like, we need to make sure that this Mayan knowledge is available for Mayan people. So they started holding these workshops and then training Mayan people to then be able to train other people.
Oh, wow.
So I was brought by sort of Mayan friends who were doing more, political economic organizing around land reform. And then they were also saying, to do that, to be explicit, to do that kind of Marxist work, we need to be thinking about these other things. They aren't just the superstructure. They aren't just unimportant. They're actually really important. Right. And so I started going with them to these glyph reading workshops and sitting there trying to calculate things in a base 20 numeric system. But also watching, young people and older people, women who were school teachers, people from these small villages, sitting there struggling to read these Mayan glyphs and get the fact that, Mayan numbers are sometimes represented as deities.
Right.
So this understanding that so much of my not very feminist fear and hatred of numbers is because I think they're hard and I don't understand them, and they seem so objective and neutral, and they sort of suck life out of everything that's important. And then here's a number that's this incredibly beautiful, boy, half naked with this beautiful face and flowing hair. And that's a number? Wait a minute. Rethinking sort of kind of through that, and then sort of realizing that all number is kind of like that. It's not just that it's really important to count the number of people who died and count the number of massacres, that those numbers don't just dehumanize, they rehumanize.
Okay.
So then numbers became a way in to be starting to think about these other struggles after the war that people were engaged in.
Let's talk about that, about after the war, because the war lasted 36 years. I'm going to start that. Let's talk about that. Yeah, we're going to get that here, but so let's talk about that, because you obviously want for people to know this is what happened, because people forget, but also that there is consequences to that genocide. And I want to know what happened from then to today as far as, is there more justice? Is there more empowerment of women? Is there less? Is there more participation in the democracy? How do people feel today in Guatemala? Because I'm sure they haven't forgotten.
I think it's very complicated, and I think in like any of these situations, especially, I mean, in Guatemala, the military ceded power. They didn't lose the war, and they put up a civilian government that was pretty much, a camouflage for the same kinds of interests that never really lost the war.
Exactly.
And so both to recover from the war, but to try to sort of continue to fight the same war for justice, the same war for equal opportunities, the same war against this racist structure, that's also a deeply economic infrastructure.
Sure. Yeah.
People are sort of struggling on so many fronts to be able to do that. And, with CICIG, it was on the legal front. People are still struggling to get land. There's, this, just like in Mexico, so many people who feel they can't survive there, so they come to the States and start sending back remittances. So then you lose, the young, energetic people from town. So that you can feel like a step forward, and that remittances do different things. You get people who know English. You get people who maybe are more savvy in different ways than they would have been if they stayed in these little towns. But then again, they're traumatized by crossing the border. They're traumatized by working 12 hours a day in a slaughterhouse in Iowa. I mean, it's sort of steps forward and steps back. What is amazing as someone who has been working there since 1985 is the transformation in what it means to be indigenous.
And that's what I wanted you to tell me.
The struggles of people, and again, some of it actually funded with U.S. money, like USAID, Ford Foundation. We're putting a lot of money into education. They're now Mayan PhDs, some of them trained in the United States, some of them trained in Mexico and other places, who are then coming back. And we know what it means as women. We know what it means to see a woman teaching us, or a woman in politics, and not only indigenous, the non-indigenous, the Ladino, mestizo folks, the Attorney General of the nation, who put into place the structures that let Rios Montt be tried in this new sexual slavery trial to happen. A Latina woman. The judges who heard the trial against Rios Montt were 2 women and a third guy, and just incredibly important strides forward for women. And then they in turn, I don't know if it's because they're women, but willing to think a lot harder about human rights as being essential for the nation. So in some of those worlds, we see pretty intense changes. A lot more kids getting education, which I think is a slow process, but it is pretty amazing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great having you.
It's been wonderful getting to know you.
Come back to Rice.
Yo sé que tú puedes, que tú eres capaz. Cambia tu vida. La vida es una y tú vas a triunfar.
Dame tu vida.
Con fe y esperanza, las puertas